Why Sigma males are the world's coldest, smartest men. Have you ever heard the adage, it's not the dog in the fight, but the fight in the dog? Sigma males, though, redefined it. They are the ones who maintain composure in the face of everyone else's emotional chaos, much as the calm breeze during a violent storm. However, what if having a high IQ also meant having a cool head like a cucumber? To borrow a line from the timeless film, The Godfather, great men don't just happen to be born great, they have to work their way up. Sigma males are strong, well-built statues. They endure adversity and emerge as models of resilience and intelligence. Their ability to adapt is what makes them the most intelligent people. Not only are Sigma males highly intelligent in academic and professional areas, but they also possess an in-depth understanding of interpersonal dynamics. They plan carefully before entering into partnerships. Their tough veneer acts as armor, keeping the vulnerable aspects within. It's a means of surviving in a world where sometimes feeling less is necessary. You must now ask yourself if they are the world's most intelligent and aloof men, or if there is more to this stereotype than meets the eye. So let's discuss these ideas in this thought-provoking YouTube video. Number 6. Discerning Approach to People. In addition to their superior intelligence, Sigma males are sometimes referred to be the smartest because of their acute awareness of social dynamics and ability to negotiate them. It resembles having a strategic mind that can understand the complex dance of interpersonal relationships. Their capacity to comprehend people and circumstances is an invaluable asset in any field, business, science, the arts, or any social setting. Their selectiveness concerning friends and people is a calculated act, not merely a sign of being distant. They prioritize deep, meaningful interactions that pique their curiosity above quantity. Even if a Sigma male's social circle is narrow, it is full of people who push and motivate them. Only those with sincere intents and similar ideals are allowed into their inner circle thanks to this filtering effect of selectivity. Because of this, Sigma males are frequently surrounded by people who make a good difference in their lives. Because of their calm and detached manner, Sigma males are frequently called cold-hearted, although the idea is not to be emotionally devoid, but to regulate them instead. Sigma males make judgments based on reasoning rather than feeling, giving logic priority over emotional responses. Number 5. They don't look to others for love. The Sigma male's capacity to avoid expecting affection from anybody is ultimately more than simply a means of survival, a technique to maneuver through the turbulent waters of emotions. They don't demand love from anybody because they don't think they're capable of loving. Rather, they want to redefine what it means to be strong and smart in a society that doesn't always get them. They have perfected the skill of being independent. They don't base their value on other people's love or approval. Sigma males are unique in a society when obtaining approval from other sources is commonplace. They create their pleasure. Sigma males dispute the stereotype that we need someone to complete us in a society where this is a constant message. They are the chief executives of their emotional health and the designers of their wholeness. However, this may give them the appearance of being cold to others. They defy convention and redefine what it means to be cool and intelligent, demonstrating to us that intelligence is more than simply knowing things. It's also about knowing yourself and the world around you. Because of this particular personality characteristic, people occasionally mistake Sigma males for being distant or heartless. However, this isn't the case. Rather, Sigma males choose carefully which emotions to invest in. Number 4. In a society that frequently values cooperation and teamwork, they do not seek assistance. There is a certain type of people who stand out and beat their drum. In the field of intelligence, the Sigma males are frequently praised for their independence in taking on tasks and for their cunning and inventiveness. But this quality also leaves a stain on them, making them appear heartless. Often seen as emotionally distant, they may just be putting self-sufficiency ahead of expressing their emotions. They are seen as both distant and brilliant problem solvers thanks to this careful balance. Their unwillingness to accept assistance isn't always a sign of arrogance. Rather, it may be a reflection of a strong sense of self-worth. It's not that Sigma males are emotionally cold. Rather, their feelings are directed within, giving them an air of stoicism that might be misinterpreted as indifference. The idea that Sigma males are emotionless is also propagated by this story, which portrays them as rough and powerful. They are intriguing but not always easy to understand because they are both intelligent and possess strong emotions. Number 3. They are silent but aware. Albert Einstein once said, "The quieter you become, the more you can hear." This idea is embodied by Sigma males. Quiet individuals focus on the details around them and take in information that more talkative types might miss. They are formidable thinkers because they can take in knowledge without feeling the need to express it. Their favorite mode of learning is observation, and the environment serves as their classroom. This quiet wisdom isn't just found in books. When in social circumstances, Sigma males are skilled at interpreting nonverbal signs, reading between the lines, and predicting how different scenarios would turn out. They possess a depth of insight that gives them an intellect that makes them incredibly shrewd and forward-thinking. Number 2, meditation increases IQ. There's more to meditation than merely sitting cross-legged and repeating the word Om. It's a cognitive exercise that enhances decision-making, memory, and attention. For Sigma males, it's similar to a mental fitness center that shapes their minds into strong thinking machines. Research indicates that consistent meditation enhances gray matter density in the brain, namely in regions linked to memory, self-awareness, and empathy. Contrary to the idea that they are heartless, meditation softens the edges of Sigma males, increasing their empathy and comprehension. Not only is frequent meditation a habit for Sigma males, but it also helps them become more adept thinkers. The mind develops more intelligently when it is at ease. Numerous studies have shown that meditation raises IQ, fosters creativity, and enhances problem-solving skills. Already a contemplative man, the Sigma male develops into a genius who steers creative ideas like a captain steering a ship. For them, it's not a lack of warmth but a conscious decision to save vitality and concentration. It's a deliberate use of emotional intelligence, not a deficiency in empathy. Number 1, they have productive hobbies. Imagine a Sigma male discreetly practicing his strategic thinking while working on a challenging challenge. Imagine them carefully building a piece of furniture, demonstrating both creativity and accuracy. For Sigma males, these hobbies are more than simply relaxing pursuits, they serve as mental exercises that sharpen their minds. There is, however, and this is a major but another side to this genius. The traits that make Sigma males the most intelligent also help to explain why they are thought to be the coldest. Their emotions seem to be protected by an imperceptible barrier that makes it difficult for others to understand what's going on under the surface. As Albert Einstein famously stated, the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge but imagination. Apply this now to Sigma males and their capacity for using their brains to pursue worthwhile interests. It's not about being distant, but rather being so absorbed in their activities that they may appear far away. That's all I have to say for today, guys. Thank you for watching. If you love our videos, hit the like button and share with your friends. Please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you in our next video on your screen.